Welcome to our series of BinSense installation videos. In this video, we'll install multiple cables in a bin and secure them with roof brackets. Bins over 24 feet in diameter need more than one cable for accurate monitoring. Check out our chart that shows you the recommended cable layouts for different sized bins. We will refer to cables as either center cables or radius cables that get installed partway down the roof. When a bin only has radius cables, they should be installed 1/4 of the bin diameter from the center of the bin on the horizontal plane. For example, on a 32-foot bin, the cables would go 8 feet from the center measured level with the ground. For bins with radius cables and a center cable, the radius cables should be installed 1/3 of the bin diameter from the center. For example, the radius cables on a 36-foot bin would go 12 feet from the center measured level with the ground. Sometimes bin manufacturers will recommend specific locations for cables. If that's the case for your bin, follow those recommendations. Also, make sure to check with the bin manufacturer if additional structural supports are needed before you start installing cables. When installing radius cables, roof brackets are needed to move the weight away from the panel and to the ribs. This is important, as grain in the bin will put hundreds of pounds of force on the cables. Center cables don't need a roof bracket because they're installed so close to the ribs. For cables shorter than 35 feet, use a 2-rib roof bracket, and cables longer than 35 feet, use a 4-rib roof bracket. If cables are longer than 50 feet, you'll need to check with the bin manufacturer for roof truss support recommendations. Installing cables means you are going to be working on the top of the bin. Make sure you use a fall arrest harness for safety and a tool belt to keep you hands-free. Start by installing the center cable. Our video on installing a single cable talks about this in detail. For the center cable, you can follow the single cable instructions directly. Radius cables need to be installed at the center of a roof panel at the location mentioned earlier in the video. Before you start drilling holes, make sure the roof bracket is going to fit in that spot. Roof brackets can reach about 25 inches between ribs, so you might have to move up or down the bin a little bit, just to make sure they'll fit. Just keep in mind that for every foot you move up the bin, the end of the cable will end up 6 to 9 inches further from the floor. Once the cable location is confirmed, install the cable and mount the cable head following the instructions from our single cable installation video. Once the cable head is installed, you can move on to installing the roof bracket. We'll start with the 2-rib roof bracket. Hang on to the tools used to install the cable in the single cable install video, and also grab a 9/16 wrench and a 7/16 socket bit. Start by attaching the angle brackets to the cable head with the 1/4-inch bolts and washers. Make sure the tops of the brackets point outward and away from each other. Next, attach the threaded rods to the angle brackets using the nuts and washers already installed on the rods. Once those are in place, we'll take off the top nut and 2 washers and set the roof bracket on top. You may need to adjust the nuts on the threaded rods to lower the roof bracket so that it sits in place on the ribs. Toss the washers and nuts back on loosely for now. Use the 1.5-inch long self-tapping screws and fender washers to attach the roof bracket to the ribs. To finish off, adjust the nuts on the threaded rods so that the weight of the cable is supported by the roof bracket, and then tighten any loose nuts. And that's all for the 2-rib roof bracket. Now we'll look at 4-rib roof bracket. Like the 2-rib, start by attaching the angle brackets with the 1/4-inch bolts and washers. And again, attach the threaded rods to the angle brackets with the nuts and washers already on the rods. Once those are in place, take the top nut and 2 washers off and then set the C-channel in place on top. Put the washers and nuts back on finger tight, so that the C-channel is loosely held in place. Next, attach the roof brackets to the C-channel one at a time. Use the 3/8 bolts with fender washers on the top and a flat washer and nut on the bottom. For now, tighten the nuts enough that everything holds together but loose enough that all the components can still move around. Use 2 1.5-inch long self-tapping screws and 5/16 fender washers to loosely attach the roof brackets to the 2 ribs closest to the sensing cable. Be careful to put the screws at the same height up the ribs so that the C-channel sits level across its length. Now, pivot the outside edges of the roof brackets until the flat surfaces on the tops of the brackets are level and the top of the C-channel is level. If you look down from above, there should only be a slight angle between the C-channel and the roof brackets. Once everything is in place, use the last 2 self-tapping screws and fender washers to attach the brackets to the outer ribs. Once the brackets are in place, tighten all the screws and bolts holding the brackets together into the ribs. As a final step, adjust the nuts on the threaded rods so that the weight of the cable is supported by the brackets, and then tighten any loose nuts. That finishes up the installation of multiple cables on our bin.